Welcome to Slightly Off Script, the marriage show where we remind you that marriage can be stupid good and wicked fun. I am one of your hosts, Bethany Needham, here with Andy Needham. Was that less awkward for you than prior?
I'm just working on my dance moves for my eventual TikTok viral movie or video. I don't even know. Is it TikTok? Just a TikTok.
The fact that you don't know makes it even more fun. Yeah, just a quick reminder right off the bat, if you have not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so, because when I get 500 subscribers...
Easy for you to say.
Then Andy Needham is going to do a TikTok dance video. Oh, maybe we can do that Dancing with the Stars move I keep seeing on TikTok, where you like grab my leg and then it looks all like
Do you have
impressive.
a physical therapist standing by for you?
It's gonna take more than a physical therapist to make to repair me after that.
Okay.
So we'll figure out something. I'm really counting on our listeners to maybe send some
suggestions?
Yeah, some suggestions.
Maybe I could just do like the old school DDR. Remember that?
No.
The Dance Revolution.
I grew up in a Christian home.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure they had one with like Sandy Patty and Carmen.
No, they did not, because we knew that dancing led to premarital sex.
What was the first concert you ever went to? The first that you remember?
Oh, my first one that I remember, I have some pretty fond memories of DC Talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were down with the DC Talk.
I was down with the DC Talk. Down with it. Never mind that man with the tat on his big fat belly. Yeah, DC Talk. How about you?
I think it was Carmen. What's now known as the Worcester Centrum. And yeah.
I feel like Carmen would put on a pretty entertaining show.
It was actually quite the production. I mean, they were like, a lot of his if you grew up in Christendom, you probably did like a skit to one of Carmen's songs or something like that. Like he had a lot of I don't know, theatrical kind of songs and stuff like that.
Love that. Just on that topic, did you ever do any of those good old 90s Christian scare people right out of hell kind of skits?
If you were a Christian in the late 90s in a youth group, there's about a 95% chance that there was an empty root beer bottle involved in some skit that you performed at some point. What was the name of that root beer company that was like, do you remember what that is? Oh man.
Is it not your...
No, that's not that. That's an actual alcoholic one.
Oh, my bad.
No, the one that actually is your father's root beer.
Oh, my
IBC.
IBC.
You could get it at Walmart. You get IBC root beer.
Is this the bottle that you would make it look like you were drinking alcohol?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Okay. Which clearly was sending you straight to the pit of hell. So it's a good thing we had those skits to scare us straight. I got to be a victim of a car accident.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where I was actually in hell.
Scare the hell out of you.
And screaming basically all sorts of shameful, guilty things back at my friend who survived.
My first church play that I was ever in, that I remember, well, I think I was a shepherd before this, an extra. But my first feature role in a church play. Can you guess do you know what role I played?
Is this the one I saw a video of where you sang 12 times louder? Oh,
no, that's pretty funny.
That was a good one.
No, but take a guess what role I might have played.
Baby Jesus.
Not even close.
Oh, Satan.
I was the serpent.
Oh.
I was the serpent. Yes.
Man.
I know.
You were the sneaky one. Do you want to know what my first role was?
Yes, I do. I want to know.
I remember my role and I remember the song. I was a star.
A star?
Yep. And I came down. Now, I wasn't alone.
A star that fell from heaven, like the devil? No.
I just remember there was a song that was like, I love ornaments hanging on a tree.
This pagan church, is it?
Yeah.
So I think you told me on a previous episode that you didn't have a Christmas tree, but at the church pageant, you sang about being an ornament on a Christmas tree?
Yeah, I was really confused.
Yeah.
What was going on? What are these trees you speak of? I only have plastic Jesus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was a church back in Nashville, Tennessee. And I must have been pretty young, so it's impressive. It obviously really...
Was that the Ryman?
No. Yes. Absolutely. There's a good chance that Stephen Curtis Chapman's kids were in that play as well.
Was he
'cause
saddling up his
also-
horses?
Wow. There is so many wonderful 90s references happening.
I apologize to any of you who did not grow up in Christian subculture who are listening to this. Like, this is like gonna go.
Literally none of that
None
made
of this
sense.
applies to you. Yeah.
Also, it was bathed in sarcasm. So please do not read into
No.
this that we actually think that these things are true. Enjoy your IBC root beer. You're fine.
Either your father's or the one that's not your father's.
Not your father's or your father's.
It is your choice.
Yeah. You do you, boo-boo.
Oh,
All right.
Goodness.
I thought this was a good start for this episode because it felt authentic.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. We're also a little loopy because we're doing kind of back-to-back recordings here.
That's what they give away the secrets.
That was me being authentic.
Yeah, well, okay. So authenticity is the value we're going to talk about. And we said we have 4 values: community,
Mm-hmm.
authenticity, which we'll talk about today.
Yep.
Mission, which will be next week, and then play,
Mhm.
which is the last one. And so I want to think about a little bit of family of origin experiences when you think about authenticity.
Is this meant to be where we bring out that my family talks about everything, even if you shouldn't talk about it, and your family doesn't talk about anything?
Well, I think there's actually an interesting layer to that because I do think that's true. That was like one of those things when you get married that you're kind of like stunned by the different forms of dysfunction that the other person's family has. And so we tend to be like, my heritage has been more conflict avoiders, and you tend to have
Conflict starters?
agitators. I don't know.
Stirrers? Creators? Conflict creators. Ooh, I like that.
However, just because you have a vocal talk about quote unquote everything family doesn't mean necessarily that it is authentic. There's not like, oh, if you're a conflict avoiding family, you can't work on becoming more authentic. And sometimes people who process everything out loud are actually not authentic. So it's something that we've had to work at. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, for sure, because authenticity is not lacking any boundaries. That is not a healthy description of authenticity. And some people think in order to be authentic, I just have to put everything out there all the time. And that is not a good idea either.
Yeah, which we'll dive into that some more. So like we did last week, let's do the things that this value is and then things that it is not. And we'll probably mix it up a little bit between the two. Why don't you start us out with what authenticity is? What is it?
Well, sometimes authenticity can be painful. I know, depending on what it means to be authentic, because authenticity is something that you're kind of in the moment being real about something. And if it's something that is raw and painful and hard, then that can be painful to talk about and to share. And again, I think it's important to note this is something we're talking about in marriage. So
Yeah.
with your spouse being willing to kind of be painfully authentic when maybe you're just wrestling with something, or it would be easier not to share than maybe it is to kind of start that hard conversation.
I think it's important to note that authenticity can have different intensities in terms of like what you're being authentic about. Like not everything has to be painful to be authentic.
Yeah.
At times it's painful, but I think we use the byline with this one that it's about living in the light. And so I think about that, like, you know, how if you're in a dark room and then somebody like turns on like these super bright lights that we have in our faces right now, getting a tan. And like, what's your first instinct when that, like your body literally like convulses, your eyes cannot function
Yeah.
at that intensity. And it's a painful thing to come into the light in many ways, even if it's a healthy thing that's going to produce, you know, a better outcome.
Yeah. And you're right. It's not, sometimes rather than painful, it could also just be awkward. Like there are some things in marriage that are awkward to be honest about. And
You share a bathroom with someone for 20 years, you're going to have some,
well, yeah.
you're going to dial in which of the your
Yeah.
rhythms and what combination of candles, fans, and sprays are going to be important.
Yeah. And never mind when you go through the aging process
Yeah.
and all the things, all the fun that comes.
I'd like to point out that now almost every morning when I head off to the gym that, I'll say my goodbyes and tell you how much I love you. And then you will look at me and you'll say what?
Oh, don't hurt yourself.
Yeah, don't get hurt.
Okay, but that is coming from you've had a pattern this year of injuring yourself. So it's out of love that I say that.
It's very authentic. Thank you.
No, I think there's definitely that. There's kind of the painful side, there's the awkward side, and in just more a serious note, I do think authenticity requires somebody to go first, like your willingness to go first.
What do you mean? Like, unpack that for me.
Well, I think sometimes in conversation when something needs to be said, there can be that feeling of a standoff, like I'm waiting for you to say something, you're waiting for me to say something, and like literally somebody needs to speak first. And my experience in this arena of authenticity is when you're willing to be authentic, whether that's pushing through pain, pushing through awkwardness, whatever it is, embarrassment, I don't know, it actually does kind of open up that sort of creates freedom even between you and your spouse for them to then also be authentic. But it's tough because you could stand off and nobody say anything, but eventually somebody's got to say it.
Yes. And that is, intentional is another word that we use pretty much for all of these values. They don't happen by accident. Nobody's like accidentally authentic. I think this is one that is easier for some people than others based on your wiring. It's like a muscle. It's how much you practice it. It'll become stronger and easier for you. But another thing that we have found with authenticity, both with one another and then with other people, is that oftentimes those are the points of connection. That like the deepest, you really cannot have, the classic line that intimacy is into me see. Like the thing about intimacy is like, if it's going to be real, then it has to be authentic, has to be real, to keep it real.
Yeah. I think too, we're talking about obviously authenticity with one another, but then just that layer of being authentic with people around us, because as we've been talking about this podcast and just a desire to celebrate marriage and highlight the awesome parts of marriage, there's also this side where I think it's powerful when you're able to, in your marriage, be authentic in some of the hard things. And again, in an appropriate, this isn't just like throw our stuff out there, but I know we have kind of funny stories that we have shared of friends of ours, which I won't name friends and shame them, but we have friends that have literally joked about, when we have shared hard things and these are people in our inner circle, and how that's actually been in a way encouraging to them when they're facing hard things of like, well, yeah, because you see someone else going through it, you don't feel as like, are we crazy? Like, why is this so hard right now? And finding those spaces to be authentic about that. Yeah, marriage is awesome. It's all these things. And yeah, also marriage is work, and it can be hard, and it can be all of those things, that sort of, good and bad, hard, fun, all the things.
I don't think I've said it in a while, but I used to say like marriage is like an extreme sport. It's like the highest of the highs. And it's the, C.S. Lewis talks about like, if you don't want to be wounded, then you'll never experience love. And like, there is a part of, if you want to experience the deepest love that you can on this side of heaven, obviously God's boundless love, and marriage should give us, it's a picture of the church. It's a picture of, at its best, how Christ loved the church. It's a foretaste of that, a shadow of it. If we want to experience that, then we have to have the vulnerability to be able to be wounded. And that's a hard thing because wounds are not fun. Like they can be deep and they can be hard and hard to walk through, but there really is no path to experience the deepest love and marriage without going through. Now you can't avoid those things. You have to go through them.
Yeah. And I would say too, we talk about obviously this authenticity, what that looks like with other people. I would say what it is not is full transparency all the time.
Oversharing.
Yes. This is not, everybody needs to know every hard detail that this is not what social media is for. And so I think that's an important distinction to make, because the reality in marriage is I do think that your marriage also needs to be a safe place.
Yep.
And that is one thing that I appreciate in our marriage that I feel like, honestly, I don't know if we've been as intentional, but I just recognize it in our marriage is I feel like we have sort of this agreement on who our inner circle is. And there's sort of that freedom. Like I feel this safety in knowing who you talk to and who you share things with. And I hope vice versa in terms of who our inner circle is. But also knowing I don't want to feel like we're going through a really hard thing and you're going to jump on your Facebook and make a status, or your TikTok and make that's going to
nobody follows that, so you don't have to worry very much. Yeah, I think that, we've kind of had times when we either said to each other like, hey, you need to go talk to your friends about something, or there's been times we've given each other, just broad permission. Like, hey, if you see something in this space, you have permission to go to my friends about that. And that's vulnerable. Like that's a hard thing to open up about and to be willing to lean into.
That's kind of been a next level thing for us recently.
Yeah.
And like,
it's true.
I feel like we faced some hard things and that we were walking through in our marriage. And the one thing that I think both of us knew is we can't walk this alone. And one of the things that I even asked of you is I need you to have other people that you're talking to. I need to find other people that I'm speaking with. And again, there was sort of that trust between us, that this wasn't about going to talk to other people to rant on on the spouse, but like we just needed support. We needed people to be speaking into our marriage. And that next level of you being like, listen, you have my full permission to go to my guy friends, like, and if you feel like I'm not listening or something's not getting through. And yeah, I don't feel like I've had to pull that card.
Well, it's interesting because I think that it's one of those things that once you build that level of authenticity and trust, not that it'll never happen, because I think it can. It's almost like you're probably going to need it less than you probably, like I'd say I probably needed that a lot more in my first decade of marriage and didn't have the tools or the permission or the understanding or the growth. And then as God gave us community and authenticity working in tandem, it's almost like you need it less often. It is a measure of accountability, too, to know that like you can't. Part of authenticity is not hiding, like not being, things coming out from the darkness into the light. It's still a work in progress. I mean, I think there probably will be time. I don't want to be like we've solved this one.
No. So, I'm sure I'll pull that card at some point.
Yeah,
get like Dan on.
Yeah.
Chris on speed dial, whatever. Boys, it's intervention time.
It's been interesting to navigate, like having sort of a ministry profile and having people who know who we are in certain circles too. That I think sometimes we think that being authentic, that it'll diminish their opinions of us. And again, I found that it's only strengthened it. And with that, the principle that we've often mentioned is just that everybody can know that something's going on. I mean, not every single like. We fought about the dishes last night, but if you're going through a valley as a couple, as a family, if you're going through a season that is like, okay, this is particularly challenging and difficult, I think be very careful in terms of like, social media mediums. But sometimes even if we're out speaking or things like that, we'll just be like, hey, you can pray for our family. This has been a hard season to walk through. The principle behind it, though, is that everybody can know something, and then some people get to know everything and should know everything. And that is, again, like a spectrum, and you have to discern that as a couple. I have a question, though. I think at different times we have struggled with this in different ways, but like recently been walking through a lot of transition and change, and there are times when like I'm like overclocking on authenticity and just want to process and talk about everything, and you're kind of like, I just want to go to the gym and not think. Like I cannot. The joke has been like, do you have any epiphanies today? How have we, or how should we, how can we calibrate when one person might be a lot stronger in pursuing authenticity and the other person is lagging behind? So there needs to be an understanding and a patience. And then there's times when just that processing, one person's like ready to go, and the other one's like, I need air.
Mm.
How do you navigate that?
That can be hard. And you're right. I'm sure there are other seasons and situations where this would be the same, but for us, it's been transition. I think recognizing that each of you are going to process differently. And I think there needs to be a respect and grace in that. And so in our scenario, because it's the only one I have an example of right now, it's funny because we have joked that we've had many Freaky Friday moments in that I find like sometimes I can be the just talk, and, put you to sleep. But in this transition, you've had a lot to process. I feel like we've had to navigate your need and desire to verbally process and think through things. I had to recognize that for me, some of that was starting to actually wear down just my emotional energy, because where you can sort of stay in the hypothetical, I realized that everything that we were talking about hypothetical, my heart was just jumping in on. And so it was just like going through this, we're dating, we're breaking up, we're dating, we're breaking up, with all of these different ideas. And so part of that honestly was we had a real conversation. And for me, some of it was we talk about being willing to go first, but it almost took me a little while to recognize what I needed, but then just being able to stop and say, hey, here's what's going on for me. I absolutely want to process with you. I think that this is important, but I'm also realizing that I am just like, I don't have emotional bandwidth for as much processing as you want to do. So you have these amazing guy friends. Can you do some of this processing with some of your buddies? And like you said, for me, sometimes my processing is actually, I need to go to the gym and deadlift for a little while and process in my head before I'm before I can sit down and actually verbalize what's going on in my head. So yeah, listening and not just expecting your spouse to figure out what you need. But for me, it was, I just needed to tell you, I love you, but I can't keep doing this.
Yeah. And it's hard when you have prolonged seasons of uncertainty for different reasons to live in that space, because you are going to process those things in different ways. So learning that, and I think we've done it very imperfectly, but we've been just kind of continually calibrating and trying to figure out how that looks.
Yeah. Well, and I would say on my end, part of my part in that is not completely shutting down on you either. Like,
yeah,
is
go for a hike. I'll see you in a year.
Yeah, that's also not kind. Like, part of me was I needed to look and be like, okay, where can I sort of create space to listen and process with you? And I feel like we were able to figure out those rhythms between let's take a walk and kind of carve out these spaces. But then you would actually, there's a couple of days where you're like, we're going to take this day and not process all of these things. Just for today, we're not even going to talk about it, and kind of set those boundaries around, let's take a mental break on this. So yeah.
I'll mention one tool that's helped me, and then I want to talk about a couple other things that authenticity is not. But for me, one of the disciplines and practices that has actually helped me with authenticity is to journal. And that is something that I never really thought that I would do, but I found the practice. I do like a daily page, and I journal one page every single day. And I've done it for over 3 years. I've never missed a day. And I say that I'll probably miss a day in the next week, but but it's a very much a key core discipline, and it's very much stream of consciousness. Sometimes I'm thinking, I'm articulating emotions or writing a prayer. Other times I'm just like, yesterday I did whatever. Like, I just kind of just write it, but it has helped me to have a more authentic sort of internal conversation. And it's really cool now that I have in my office a stack of like 10 full journals. I can go back and see, even with transition that we're walking through now, I can go back and see the different sort of markers in there when we were considering different options and thinking through different things. So that's been helpful. So I think, obviously community is one thing, but then how do you cultivate an authentic conversation in your own walk with Jesus and make sure that that's calibrated right? Is there anything that has helped you in that space?
I don't have like a stack of journals for 3 years.
You have a stack of journals that you've stolen from me that are just not quite as consistently filled out.
That's right. They reflect me.
You do it your way.
I do think journaling is helpful. I actually find that some of that for me is getting out and walking and being in nature and just getting quiet and quieting things around me. I've been reading a book recently talking about this idea of a reflective life, and it actually talks about journaling and taking the time to really to think on things and reflect on things and notice things. And all of that for me requires a slowing down and a quieting my mind and my heart. And those are things that are just naturally sort of help build that or cultivate that, being in nature or just sitting in a quiet living room with my journals.
Yeah, I think another thing, and every time I think of this, I'm like, man, I need to do this more consistently, is writing letters to each other or to your kids. If you are under 30, that's when you like handwrite an email. And
I think they still know how to write.
I know. Probably not cursive though.
Sure.
That was such a big deal
Yeah.
when we were kids.
Nobody cares
Nobody
anymore.
cares. Yep. Our relationship kind of started with writing letters to each other.
Most of my books, my bookmarks are letters that you've written to me.
Yeah.
You may not feel like you're consistent, but I actually would say that is one thing that you do very well. And I definitely appreciate, because you're somebody, I feel like everybody has certain ways that they communicate.
Yeah, exactly.
For you, pen to paper is one where I feel like just how clearly you communicate, you're very good at putting your heart down on paper. And I have evidence of that. Lots of bookmarks.
Yeah. I think it's a good point though, just that like there's going to be a different algorithm for each person in terms of the ways that you like where, how. Is it going for a walk? Is it having a conversation? Is it, going out to eat and sitting across the table? Like we love to go out to eat together, but I don't feel like that's usually we're just having fun when we're doing that. Like for us, that's not necessarily, I think going for walks, sometimes sitting in the living room, you got to find your space and your kind of cadence. And again, depending on what the other big rocks in your life, if you're just, in a phase of life where you're Ubering kids to soccer practice and everything else, like it's difficult to have these things. You may be able to carve out, hey, we're going to have one meeting a week where we kind of really sit down and talk about things. And another thing that I have done is in my phone, like in the notes app, I do this for work too, but like I have a note for you that is like conversations that we need to have, because there are things that come up in the course of a day, a week, that it's like, okay, like it could even be like how we're spending money or something like that. I can easily fire off a text and be like, what the heck are you doing at Trader Joe's and buying all of the things that does happen?
What the heck are you not doing at Trader Joe's buying all of
I
this
do that
goodness?
sometimes, but there's other times when it's like, okay, I just need to put in the notes like, hey, we need to have a conversation about this when I'm not like at a 10 and, you're just trying to, buy all the conditioners in the world. No, you do have great hair.
Thanks, Trader Joe's. They have amazing
the hair
shampoo.
mask, she highly recommends it. No, but that's like being able to like have the right conversation at the right time is another big element.
Yeah. I feel like my principal probably had a note in his phone. I was like, conversations needed to have with
next
Bethany.
time Bethany's called to the office. I think as we kind of wrap up on authenticity, it is definitely a core value for us. I think that word is so popular in culture that I do want to be careful that authenticity, like a couple things to say, it's definitely, it should not be self-serving. Like everybody look at me, that oversharing, putting the focus on ourselves. The purpose of your authenticity aligns with the purpose of your marriage. Vulnerability, authenticity, it really should be a frame that points to Jesus. At the end of the day, it's not self-serving. It should be pointing others to Christ and what he has done, not making ourselves the hero of the story.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is that authenticity often makes space for God's grace, and in a way that other people can witness that, because I think we live in a world that people need to not just see our brokenness, but also to get to bear witness to God's grace in our marriage.
That's great. It's a great place to wrap that up. So we do have some listener questions that come in.
Are they going to be
they're not in funny accents.
Okay.
No. This is from a couple that we've been doing premarital counseling for.
Oh, goody.
So,
this is their chance to come at us now.
You want to explain who that is?
So Abby and Christian, I'm assuming that's who's asking this question. Yeah, sweet young couple getting married soon.
Similar to us, both come from ministry families. And it's really been super fun.
It has been fun and fun to get to know them, excited for them to start this journey together. So kind of nervous about the questions that are about to come, but here we go.
You ready? Here's the first one.
If you were to describe your relationship in one word, what would that word be and why?
Oh man, this one's for you. You're like the king of putting things, like you name everything. And you're really good at you're good at pen to paper, but also
So I think you should go first, and then I'll improve upon it. That's really
good
what
because
that's actually what I'm good at. Like a lot
yeah,
of my
because
ideas are like taking something like the clay and like helping it.
yeah, that's the problem. I'm gonna come up with like 10 words. So one word for our marriage, what would it be and why? I am going to say my one word is beautiful,
Oh,
is
that's
the
a good one.
word that comes to mind. I don't know why that I'm
Yeah.
smirking as I say that, but
You said it kind of undermines your story. It's beautiful. Wow, it's so good.
it's so beautiful.
I would just probably go healthy. That would be my word.
Healthy.
Healthy. And healthy doesn't mean perfect. So that's her first question. All right, ready for number two?
Wait, you didn't answer why.
Why?
Didn't she say and why?
Because I do think we exercise our marriage, like we work at it, and it's something that we feel like we've made progress in. And so, yeah, that would be why.
I love it.
Did you say why would be beautiful?
Have you looked in the mirror
No.
lately? Case closed.
That's not an answer. It's not authentic.
That's true.
All right, ready for the second one?
Maybe. Let's go.
If you guys could do anything you wanted and knew that God would provide all the resources and guarantee success, what would you do?
Ooh, okay, you have to go first this time.
I think this is exactly what we're trying to figure out right now. It's funny when I hear this question because it's an odd calibration. Maybe it's the way that I look at God and our resources and our skills, but like, I feel like this is the question that I ask. Like, hey, God, what would you want me to do if I was fearless? Why would I do anything other than that? It doesn't mean that we're not stewards. As you get older, you have things like mortgages and people who count on you. Like, you don't throw caution to the wind. But at the same time, like, we have one life to live. Like, we have one life in front of us that we can invest. We cannot do everything. You don't need to be the best at everything. I wasn't the best worship leader. I wasn't the best conference runner, whatever. But I can, whatever God puts in front of me, do it to the best of my abilities. I do think for me, a lot of it is being a connector, being a champion for others, being somebody who comes alongside churches and pastors. And that path, again, I often talk about that's sort of the big C calling being your place, your people, and your passion. And then your assignment being how you do that. And so we've been in a season where we're saying, all right, God, affirm our calling. Like, are we still called to this place, to New England, or is it to a more particular place, a certain community of people, or is it another part of the country? And here's what we think we're passionate about. Like, we are definitely testing those things. But then as God affirms and directs, then we're trying to figure out what the assignment is. And yeah, I'm excited about, I think we're getting close to knowing what the next assignment is going to be, and stay tuned for future episodes. What would you say?
Okay, so it would be everything that we're doing right now, plus picture a big property, okay? And there's a lake.
Okay.
We are living in kind of a farmhouse style wraparound porch.
I don't know if I'm on board with this vision.
Listen, this is my turn, okay? And we're living in this house, but on the property there are other little properties, like other little houses. So we actually are housing people who are
cult?
No, these are ministry leaders.
Okay.
It's
I'm sorry. I'm like making fun of your vision. This is bad. I'm sorry.
This is my time, my vision.
Large property, big farmhouse, lots of other houses. There's water.
Yeah. Well, so my house is on a lake. That's just more of a personal dream. But so the property is sort of this mix of, like, you have ministry people who are coming to the Northeast. And so there's like a training area, sort of a cultural immersion type of thing. And they live here, but they're actually serving in different areas in different churches and doing different things. But also maybe some ministry leaders who are looking for respite and they need, a place to go. And so they have like real cool yurts for them that they can like stay in around the lake. But also there's like a full farm where we're taking in all these farm animals.
Okay.
That listen, my vision,
this is
my
where you
time.
lost me.
And these animals have been
Oh,
rejected and abused, and we are taking them in.
And eating them for dinner.
No, not your vision.
Somebody might say it
Farm
sounds like a camp.
Animals. There's a coffee shop there somewhere.
gosh.
A library.
Yeah. Okay. In
Yeah.
a big gym, I'm sure. All right. Let's go to.
Oh, yes. I forgot about that. And the barn
Pray for me, everybody. Please
like-
pray for me.
has a lifting gym.
A lifting gym.
Oh, with goats.
Oh, you're lifting goats.
Yes.
Okay.
Power lift
Oh,
with
my
goats.
Lord.
Thank you for sending in your questions.
I don't know if I want to do the last question or not.
I'm really excited about this.
This
vision.
actually might be a good setup for the last question.
Lord Jesus, may it be.
Ready?
I'm ready.
What are some conflict resolution strategies that you guys have learned throughout your marriage?
See, it's very going to be appropriate coming out of this episode.
Don't share your dreams.
Here's your dream. Bah, bah, bah.
This is my dream. This is Andy. Watch on YouTube to get that visual. Oh, conflict resolution.
All right. We're going to have a full episode about conflict at some point, but I wanted to give one example, and maybe you can think of one. And this was one that I got from a secular writer, Brene Brown. And she talked about how when you're in conflict, it can be very helpful to predicate any sentence that you say about what you're feeling or experiencing with this phrase. The story I'm telling myself is ... Because it actually is a de-escalatory statement that allows that for the fact that you may not see things as they are, but at the same time, what you're experiencing is still legitimate to be able to express. And so it's putting the thing on the table in a way that's de-escalatory. So the story I'm telling myself is, you didn't do this, and that means this. That does. I'm not being demonstrative. Like one thing we learned again early in marriage is like avoiding the you always, you never, the always and never. So I think this is like an antidote to the always and the nevers that we can have in conflict by using that. The story I'm telling myself is, and then kind of express what we are feeling.
Yeah, I think somewhat in line with that is when you're trying to communicate back and forth is taking the time to reflect back to the person, like, this is what I'm hearing.
Mirroring, yeah.
Yeah, like mirror that back, because oftentimes, especially in conflict, it's you're saying something, obviously, whether it's my own hurt, what is going on, my own filters, I might be hearing something totally different than what you're trying to communicate. And so taking that time to sort of mirror that back and give you the opportunity, if I'm like, okay, this is what I'm hearing, and I say something back that you're like, okay, no, that's not what I'm trying to say at all. I find that can be very helpful.
That's fantastic. It's a really good answer.
So, yeah.
All right. So we have an interview.
Yeah. I'm very excited, but you can tell them about them because I only know them through you.
That's not true.
It's not?
We've done events with them.
I know, but you met them first.
Well,
okay, they're both our friends, but go ahead.
The Teagues is a great couple from Nashville, Tennessee, and they are phenomenal musicians, and they put out music under the name
Out of the Dust.
That's right, Out of the Dust. I was testing you to see if you know.
I was like, when you held your hand out, I'm like, is this a test?
First of all, go listen to their music. Like if they didn't have the story they have, they still are incredible musicians. But a part of their story that they're going to talk about is they went through a level of conflict that their marriage fell apart, and God has rebuilt it in a really beautiful and powerful way, which they'll share. They are one of the most authentic couples that I know. And so you picked a really good couple to have a conversation with. So here's our interview with the Teagues.
I am so excited because I get to sit down with maybe one of my favorite ministry couples that I have gotten to meet. No pressure. I know I'm setting the bar high here, but what a gift it has been from the moment that I've gotten to meet you guys, hear your story. You were one of the first people that came to mind when Andy and I were talking about this idea of authenticity and that being such a value for us in marriage. Chris and Stephanie, you two are two that to us have just set an example of that for us in a really powerful way. And so thank you for coming on the show today.
Wow. I've heard people on podcasts, be described by the host as like, "Oh, this is one of my favorite." I'm like, "Man, how does that feel when someone gets that introduction?" Now I know.
Yeah,
Just so
really.
grateful. Thank you. What a
I
great
was going to say,
introduction.
how does it feel?
I feel very honored. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, well, I love that. For people who have not had the privilege of hearing you guys and your story, I would love for you just to take a few moments and you can decide who gets to talk when. We get to see all that fun. You've done this enough. So I feel like
A few
you've
times.
done this dance. Yeah. But take some time to just share a little bit of your story with us so people can get to know you.
We'll fake the whole like, do you want to talk? Who should talk?
That's faking. We've done it so
Maybe
many
who?
different ways.
I guess you should talk. Maybe I should.
Go for it.
Okay. We've devoted our lives to the power of story. We know that testimonies have power. People hear our story and they really do. I mean, you were mentioning authenticity before. People hear our story and they'll ask us all the time. They'll be like, how do you just keep telling? I know it must be so difficult to tell your story and relive that all the time, but it truly is a gift. So we did meet when we were in high school. We were on a mission trip to Philadelphia. And
Nice.
yeah, it was supposed to be somewhere in the Caribbean.
Someday. Philadelphia felt third world
Yeah.
to us Tennessee kids. So
Right.
culture shock.
Yeah, and we fell in love pretty quickly after, the trip was like this really beautiful time for us to get to know each other and spend time together on the bus. And we were just always sitting together playing games. But we fell quickly in love after that. In high school, we were these high school sweethearts. We were saying, I love you like 3 months in. Everybody was rolling their eyes. It was gross. And
Not us.
no, we loved it. We were young and dumb and in love and decided to get married when we were in college. Halfway through, we stayed in the same town so we could move in together and keep going to college together while we were married. And so we did that. And that was great. We were this young Christian couple checking all the boxes, doing all the right things. We were serving together, using our gifts of music and leading worship together. And everything felt great to us. We were just kind of blind and, hey, this is amazing. Life is great. Marriage is going to be great. And it was for a little while. But I think because of how blind and how alone we were, we were like the first in our group to kind of get married. So we didn't have a lot of people around us who were kind of walking the same season. And so compound to that, I start walking through this season of doubt in my life. And again, very alone because there's nobody else in my world or in my friend group who's like asking these same questions, or if they're asking the questions, they're not saying them out loud. So I just kind of hid all of that because I didn't know what to do with it. I felt shame about these questions of, is God real? Is God good? Is the Bible true? How do we know? All this stuff. And those very good questions sort of kept compounding and leading the way as I was into physics and, biology and, I kept bumping up against the edges of what I'd been taught in these things in faith. And so it was just very scary for me to walk through that. And that opened the door to sin in my life because I didn't feel like I could share that with anybody. And so as isolation takes root in our lives, it does open the door for the enemy because those voices, when we don't share what we're thinking, what we're feeling, maybe even the lies that we're hearing, we don't know how to parse that out on our own. And I started falling victim to these deceptive ideas like, you got married too young, you were too young, you're too different now, you've grown apart. The soil of my heart was really ready for that because I was hurting and that was a way out for me. So the way that I dealt with my pain was not to face it, but to try and run away from it. I also was getting into drugs and alcohol and parties and porn and friends and anything to try to make my hurt and this shame of who I was. I'm not good. If they know who I am, if they know what's really going on, they wouldn't understand. They would reject me. They would abandon me. All that stuff was hitting really hard. And so I sat Stephanie down one night in January of 2010 and I said 14 words. It's a conversation for another day, but there's two types of communicators. There's like the enjoy the ride communicator where you're just talking about details. And then there's land the plane. You just get to the point. And apparently I'm land the plane because I just sat her down. She knew nothing. She'd heard about some of the questions maybe once that I was having, but just literal ton of bricks all on her at once. I don't believe in God anymore, and I don't want to be married anymore.
Mm.
And about a month later, I went to a divorce lawyer's office, not knowing what the heck I was doing, just doing what I thought I had to. I hated to hurt everybody, but I was also being really selfish. I needed what I wanted. I needed to have that because that was my solution. So it started all of that, and I moved out. She moved out, and the divorce was final.
Yeah. And then the life that I thought that I had, that I'd built, that I'd planned for and envisioned for the future in those 14 words. So it was just gone,
Mm.
completely gone. As much as I tried to hold it and grasp it and keep it together and try to change his mind and convince him of all these things that I felt were true, I couldn't. I couldn't.
Mm.
And, I had lived a very safe, a very solid life, raised in a Christian home with great godly parents who raised me to know Jesus. And the way I'd grown up couldn't compute with what was happening because divorce wasn't supposed to be a part of my story. That
Yeah.
wasn't something that made sense in this black and white kind of right, wrong, do the right thing, bad things won't happen. This worldview, this mindset that I had created as a young adult. Because I had not really been faced with suffering or like really deep trials. So I did not know how that fit in my life. I didn't know what to do with that pain and with that really what it comes down to, that lack of control.
Mm.
that that
Mm.
that I thought I could control my life and make it be what I wanted it to be, and I couldn't.
Mm.
So from that point, it was walking through all those stages of grief, of learning what it means to let go of the control, because being raised to in the faith and understanding that we're supposed to give it all over is to say it is one thing, but to live it out is completely different. And so it really wasn't until I was forced to my knees, forced
Mm.
to see right in front of my face that I'm not in control. And when I try to be, it's not good. I think it's just
Mm.
not good for my heart. And it also I don't do the right things a lot of times when I try. I thought that we had done the right things. And again, it's that word right. Like if I can do the right things, then the right things will happen. And that
Mm.
wasn't the case. So, but one thing about our stories and these two, as our journey split, and God had a path for both of us, a very necessary path. I know for me, as the one of the like quote unquote victim side, it was really easy to put all the blame on him, to feel like it was all his fault. But God very graciously didn't leave me in that place. He showed
Mm.
me that during that time, I think when my heart was finally fertile enough for him to get to, that I saw my sin for what it really was. My pride, my self-righteousness, all these things that I put my security in, my identity in, and it was all for nothing, right? Like I
Mm.
need to know that my identity was purely in being a daughter of the king and that I could trust him with my story, even if it was completely different than I ever thought it would be, even if Chris never came back in my life and, I have this whole list of unknowns. Like I had to get to the place of letting it go and trusting him with all of it.
Yeah. And then, from my end, as I left, I wrote this probably 10,000 word manifesto. I don't know. It was ridiculous. Of all these reasons I didn't believe, I needed to be known. I needed to be understood. I needed to feel heard because I'd been hiding for so long. So I did. And I met with people, everybody wants to meet with me and find out what's going on and probably try to change my mind. I wasn't having any of that. I was just, we've said it a lot before, but I was like an iron fist with a velvet glove. I'm very
Mm.
nice, very cordial. don't want to hurt your feelings, but this is what I'm doing, and you can't do anything to stop me. So that that season continued for a while, and it felt really good to tell the truth, because that's just part of reality, is when we tell the truth, uh, it sets us free. So there was this weight that was lifted off, but I wasn't set free because I was still chasing after and believing these lies of what would ultimately fulfill me. And I got to
Mm.
do these things in the light. Now I've been hiding and I've been in the dark for so long, but now I can live the way I want to, no accountability, uh, no, shamelessly do all
Yeah.
these kind of wrong, rebellious behaviors. And it felt good for a while, but we know how that story ends. We know how deceptive that can be and how alluring that can be. And we all believe it in different ways, chasing after things to make us happy, but it didn't. The new relationships and the drugs and alcohol and parties, friends and all that, the pleasure stopped after a while. And I was just left with uh, just the brokenness of who I was. And the way that this all happened for me was in a pretty explosive way. It's another story for another day, but suffice it to say, my life blew apart from the choices that I had made and the things that I was chasing after. And it left me just a broken shell. I was so scared. I was more scared than I'd ever been, and I was more alone than I had ever been. And as I woke, like I was waking up in cold sweats, I was battling these like anxious thoughts, these dreadful thoughts like my life's over, things, it's never be the same. Why did I do this? I pushed everybody away, and now my life is just in shambles. And even though I'd pushed God away, I'd always left a window cracked, like even for it was almost a point of pride, but I would say like, I don't know that God's not real, but for all intents and purposes that, we just can't know. We'll never know for sure. He might be real, but we can't interact with him. Well, God knew that what I actually needed was to interact with him. I knew all about him, and I'd gotten all these rules and all these ideas and these arguments against him to try and figure out a way to intellectualize my way to him and figure out how to prove him through facts and figures. But what I needed was presence. I needed to experience him.
Mm.
You know, he did that to me. He did that for me in a variety of ways in that season. Um, for one, people ask us all the time, what do I do? I have a prodigal in my life. I have someone who's run away, or I have a person making terrible decisions. What do I do? How do I get through to them? And my mom was just a steady, constant presence for me in that. I think she kind of embodied God's presence for me in that time. The ministry of presence is so much more powerful than a lot of us give credence to. And she heard from God very early on, just love him. And she did. And so as I hit rock bottom, I was I was reaching. I needed something. I realized that what I did didn't work. My way didn't work. Through real prayers, through opening the Bible for like the first time, just sort of cracking it open to see what might be in there, and what might God have for me. I felt that something was reaching out to me, something, and I wanted to reach back. So I started praying these real prayers of fear, of doubt, of hurt, anger, and God didn't go away. He didn't run away from my heart. He actually wanted to hear all of that from me all along. So through, like I said, scripture, through friends texting me at these like insanely coincidental but can't be a coincidence moments, God really just gave me what I needed to know that he was there with me, pursuing me, and it started to change me. It started to transform from the inside out. And I heard this voice, very clearly, but I ignored it at first. It was just too crazy. But I kept through reading his word, through seeking him in prayer. I just kept hearing over and over and over again until I couldn't ignore it anymore, that God was telling me that I was supposed to remarry my ex-wife. That was crazy to me, because I remember even telling her, even if I believed again someday, we just don't make sense. Like, that was where my head was at. So truly was it took a true act of God to even begin to change my heart towards being open to that.
Well, and the timeline didn't line up with me either as far as, God's message to him. But obviously we're sitting here talking today. So God did something here. So we long story short, we met up for the first time after the divorce, after he had kind of felt God moving him towards some kind of reconciliation. And we spent, I think it was 5 hours just talking, walking the neighborhood. And at the end of the conversation, Chris shared, well, God's told me that we should be together again. And
Yeah.
it was, it was one of those things where like it was this strangely beautiful conversation that we had that night. But this is still very fresh. I think this was very quick, less than a year when we had met up again since
But
everything
come
blew
on, God
apart.
told me, Stephanie.
Right. Well,
How
God
can
hadn't
you
told
argue?
me yet.
How can you
So,
argue with that?
but I saw the change in him. I saw the vulnerability. I saw God's spirit. Like I saw it, but I needed to know that that change didn't have to do with me. I
Mm.
needed to know that that was purely between him and the Lord, because if he was trying to do that because of me, like, it was never that just wasn't gonna work. That's not gonna work.
And people say all the time, like, how do you know when you're ready? Or they'll ask, like, how did you navigate, that process? And I'll say I've said it before in this interview and I'll say it again. God gives us what we need. And God knew that
Mm.
I needed a wise wife who wasn't just gonna flippantly jump into something, and I don't think I truly wanted that either, but we
And
had to put in the work.
yeah, I say, I had forgiven him at that point. Like, that forgiveness can feel like a process sometimes, but,
Not linear.
as believers, like, we've been forgiven, so it's something we're called to. But trust is not something that we should be just freely giving away. And so
Especially
he
to people who've hurt us.
yes, so he needed to
Mm.
earn that back, because here I am, like, I'm risking all of that again. Like, that's no small thing to have to potentially walk through what I had just walked through again. So trust takes time, and that is shown over however long. There's no magic number of like, when do you trust again? But
Mhm.
it's seeing those repeated actions over and over again
Mm.
with the fulfilled promises and things. So
And we just couldn't do it alone.
yeah,
We couldn't have done it alone. We needed pastors, we needed friends, we
counselor,
needed
yeah.
counselors, multiple, separately and together. It was a lot of work, and we couldn't do it alone. And that's what we tell everyone, like, "Hey, you can't do this alone." Whether it's professional or whether it's communal help, you gotta involve other people in your life.
I like
Mm.
authentically too, because the first time around we were surrounded by people all the time. We were
Yeah.
part of a massive church. We were in a college group, leading a college group. We were always around people. We were serving. We were doing all the right things, but nobody really knew us. I don't think nobody really
Mm.
knew what was going on in our marriage, to the point where I don't think we even knew.
No,
Um,
no.
we didn't know what we didn't know. And
Yeah.
we weren't seeking out that wisdom. We weren't seeking out mentors, and there wasn't anybody really asking us those hard questions either. So we knew we wanted to do things different the second time around. So after a season of a few months of us really pursuing what God had for us separately, we came together with the same counselor we had been seeing separately, and we're all in agreement with our family and, pastors, and that if we wanted to pursue this again, that, God is he is a God of restoration, and if at all possible, like, that's his heart for us and for relationships. So we ended up starting completely over, like, second, first date, got engaged a few months later, and then we're remarried in a tiny little ceremony in Nashville, just the two of us and a few family members. And that was, gosh, do the math. 13 years ago is when we got remarried. We celebrate both anniversaries, so that's like our redemption anniversary, and now have two little trophies, our kids are trophies of redemption, who are here because of what God did.
Wow. Man, I don't even know how many times I've heard you share your story, and it's that I'm, like, choking up on the other side, like, "Hold it together, woman." I just love just what you were saying, Stephanie, that God is a God of restoration, and that being his heart, and hearing that in your story. And, I don't even know that I made the connection until you were talking, Chris, at the beginning, because I think of your story as this you have this ministry of that is really sharing, and it's such an authentic way your journey and what you've walked through. But in a lot of ways, there's that power that part of, in some ways, how the enemy got his foot in the door was a lack of authenticity
Hmm.
in the beginning and just the hurt that that can cause. And so we'll talk a little bit more kind of at the end. I'd love for you guys to just share with people how they can hear your story, maybe how they can invite you to where they are to share your story. But just a couple of things that, as I think about what you do, which is literally you travel around and you share this. So you have had to sort of, I would assume, over the years, learn this, it's the gift of being authentic and what that looks like. I'm wondering, what have been, or have there been things that you've learned that you've had to sort of tweak along the way in learning how to be authentic when you are in front of, because you stand in front of crowds of people in a lot of different settings. Are there things that you've learned along the way in just what it looks like in a healthy and beautiful way to be authentic about something that is very hard that you've walked through?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, two things. The first thing that comes to mind is how powerful it is to just continue telling your story because of the, I mean, we're a unique case, but our relationship to our story and the things that we have learned about ourselves and about each other and even about what God is doing in us and did in us, like it comes not just through thinking about it, telling it one time. Like it's this process that happens over and over and over. So it's kind of like this beautiful gem, that as you continue to turn it in the light, you see all these different aspects and angles and corners of your heart to see what God wants to do, what he is doing. So there's that. There's just the power of continuing to do story work, essentially, as kind of a therapy term. But the second thing that comes to mind that I've learned and am still learning, and even texted a friend of mine about this yesterday, is that for us, it can become a temptation to think about how authentic we are from stage and how many times we tell our story and like, oh, look at how open and vulnerable we are. Well, we're open and vulnerable about the parts of our lives that we are here to share with you. And so the temptation for me, probably as a habitual hider, is that I can kind of hide behind that and use that as this shield. So like, oh, look how I can deceive myself. Oh, look how authentic I am, but to be that with people in my life about what's happening now, about the issues that I'm having and the hurt that I'm causing to my own family, even like this week that I'm texting my friends about, hey, this happened in our house this week. And I just got to share this with you because I'm feeling shame. I'm feeling this. That's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, and I think sharing it from stage and our concerts and things, I think we've always said that we don't want to have a scripted show. We have our set list and we have our songs in the order that we're going to do, but we want to leave room for the Holy Spirit, and because like you said, there's some people that will hear our story multiple times and it's such an encouragement for people to say, like what you said, that they still, God showed them something new when they heard it this time. We always want to be open to which corners he wants us to like press into at this particular
Mm.
show for these particular people. We do everything together, which, not everybody would be on board with that. And, we parent together, we're married, we travel and do ministry together full time. When we're at home, we're working together at home. We're on the road, we're doing everything. So I think that it really forces us to be authentic because if we are struggling or there's some hiding in one area, like at personally at home, it'd be really hard for us to hide that when we're like, we have nowhere to hide, literally, especially when we're traveling on the road. So, and I love what you were saying. It reminded me just about us telling our story over and over again. It is this constant, like in the Bible, there's so many places it talks about like,
Mm.
remember what I did when God's like, remember this thing that I did when I rescued you. Remember when I saved you from this. I think stories are a gift of this remembrance of constantly going back and seeing his faithfulness through all of it. no matter what we're
Mm.
dealing with in the present, it is this beautiful way of forcing us to go back and see what he did.
And as you do that in community, you'd be so amazed how many times we tell our story and people be like, I'm not going through anything like that, but God just so used your story. So, and I'm not saying that to toot our horn. I'm saying that God is just so good to use
Mm.
whatever is going on in your story, not only to heal you, but to encourage and give hope to other people around you. Even if you're a mess, even if what you're sharing, there doesn't seem any hope in it. If it's just what's happening in your heart and how God is moving and working in that, or even just your frustration about how he's not working in that the way that you would want to, or on the timeline that you want to. As you share that openly, authentically with other people, it encourages them in ways that you could never imagine, like I said, and it can begin to heal your
Yeah.
heart too.
Well, and just side note, it reminded me also, as we're talking about authenticity and about how there wasn't a lot of that from you, like you were hiding all this stuff. Well, that was that was something we both dealt with. I just didn't realize it.
Mm.
I think I was really good at putting on this front of being like the good wife and doing what I was supposed to do, but I wasn't a safe place for him to come to with his doubts and with his questions because I like that stuff was just wrong in my head, right? So I don't know that I could have a a
Mm.
loving, humble conversation about that. So yeah, there's authenticity is something that is so, so crucial in a marriage. And then for us, that goes into ministry and what we do for a living as we steward the story that God has entrusted us with. And like you said, not that's not just about marriage. Like
Mm.
this is a story, God's story of hope and redemption, no matter the situation and no matter the ending too, because we
Mhm.
know full well that not everybody gets this kind of restoration as much as,
Mm.
we wish we could say they do.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys even just sharing this. There's obviously the ministry of what you do, but even in the little bits of your conversation, hearing about, texting a friend or the conversations with your community, just knowing kind of your story, how you described from the very beginning, not really having an authentic, like you had plenty of people around you, but not necessarily deep, authentic community. But now looking where you're at now, what are the things for you when you think about what makes a healthy, authentic community? Like when you're how do you build that around your marriage? And then what are the steps you take aside from the things you do on platform to continue? Like Chris, you mentioned, if you're somebody that could easily even hide behind the stories of like, I choose what the stories I tell but there's always day-to-day stuff that goes on. So what does that look like for you guys in terms of your community now? And then how are you intentional? Like, what does it look like to be intentional to remain authentic just in that day to day?
Yeah, I'll start with kind of your first question, which was how do you build that? And when you get that question, sometimes it's like, yeah, when we tell our stories, like, and when we go to places and tell our story, there's just like this, it's the Holy Spirit in the room. Like there's this reciprocity. There's this thing that bubbles up in us when we hear other people share. And
It makes them feel less alone, I
yeah,
think.
and they
Yeah.
want that. They want that for their community. They want that for themselves. And they're like, how do I start that? And I always just say, you got to go first. If you want to build the kind of vulnerable community that you got to go, you have to lead with your vulnerability first. And that opens up the
Mm.
doors for other people. It might be scary. You'll experience all the same fear that everyone experiences as they begin to tell their story. But you will be amazed as long as you're in a healthy community and you're not
Yeah.
in some like toxic legalist, some sort of weird situation where it's not safe and it's not open. You'll be amazed at how God moves and works. And then I guess you could talk about how we cultivate that now.
Yeah, well, I think as far as community is concerned, we find so much life in just being in a small group at our church and our community groups. It's like the core of our church DNA, and we're very blessed to be in a community that values that because
Mm.
that's not always the case. And for us, it's just the DNA of our group that people can come and say, "Hey, like we really struggled this week. Like I didn't even want to come today, but I'm here." Those kinds of authentic conversations, the, hey, I started therapy this week because I can't handle my depression anymore. Those conversations. But like you said, like you have to go first, because that's not everybody's first response in a group, especially if you've never experienced that kind of community.
And that community group that we're in was cultivated by leaders who went
Mhm.
first,
Yeah.
who are willing to be messy and broken and vulnerable.
Yeah. And if that's hard to find, start with one person. I think God will show you that one person who can be a safe person. You go out to coffee, you invite them over to your home, cook a meal together, or just have them over, or whatever. There's no plan. There's no like specific thing you've got to do. There's no,
Yeah, you just show up and say, hey, I'm kind of tired of like surfacey level conversation. I really need to go deep with somebody. Would you want to do that with me? Boom. Boom. You're in.
Yeah, go for a way on a walk with me on the greenway, or whatever it is. There's ways, as awkward as it can feel. If you're doing something, it doesn't feel as awkward.
That's true.
Just FYI. If you're just like
Yeah.
sitting across from each other, sometimes that's tough.
Let's stare at each other.
My introverted self has a hard time with that sometimes. So I'd rather go do something.
Let's lock eyes and tell secrets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just stare into each other's eyes until
Yeah.
somebody breaks. Well, this is exactly what I hoped it would be. And that I feel like we got to hear a really good piece of your story. But I also know that there's so much more that you guys do and can offer. And so before we wrap this up, can you just share with our listeners if they want to hear more of your story, if they want to just get more in touch with what you're doing, where should they go? How do they stalk you in an appropriate way?
Yeah,
We're stalker friendly.
The crazy thing, we haven't really talked about it, but once God healed our marriage, it became clear within a few months that he was calling us to tell it, and that music was going to be the platform he was going to give us to do that. So really our ministry, it was birthed from our story through music. So you can find our music. Our band is called Out of the Dust. That's our story. What God brought out of the dust, just like in Genesis when he created us. But all of our music is inspired in some way by our story and what God has done. And we write real authentic music because we want people to find themselves in it. We don't want to just write the like pithy Christian lyrics, which I'm not hating on the Christian music industry.
I am a little bit. But
our
I'm with
latest
Chris.
I'm being nice. Our latest project called Stages, like the whole album is starting in a place of hurt or trauma and moving towards healing, but we're not afraid to write about the questions, that we have for God, and saying, God, you know what? I want to trust you, but I don't. Those hard things. So we just want people to feel less alone when they hear our music, when they hear our story. So all of that, our music is streaming everywhere. Out of the Dust. You can just search Out of the Dust. Our story is in a lot of places. We've got some YouTube videos. We've got a book forthcoming. More news on, so stay tuned of our story. So that'll be the most in-depth resource we'll have for you, hopefully sometime soon. So anywhere you want to search, just search Out of the Dust. Music helps because there is a book called Out of the Dust. That's not us. It's about like the Dust Bowl. That's not us. And just our website, outofthedustmusic.com.
Yep, for anything, booking or otherwise, speaking events, concert events,
So
date nights, marriage conferences.
Yeah, we travel all over the country. We've been to almost all the states. So we love getting to come to churches for weekend services and speak about our story, share our music, provide marriage events where anywhere God leads us and we make a way, we'll be there.
Oh, that's awesome. And I can personally attest that you should book them, bring them out for whatever event you're doing. And
thank you.
It'll be incredible. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right. That was an incredible story.
2 for 2 on the interviews. Good job.
It helps when you know these people that are just kind of amazing. You just give them a microphone. There's not much to it. So
I don't know. I don't know if you're being authentic.
no, seriously. One of the things I love in interviews is the opportunity to sit and listen to other people's stories. And the Teagues are a couple that anytime we've had connection with them, that we've had the chance to hear their story, just being around them, the gift that they are to the people around them. And I appreciate them a lot. So
I just want to encourage you. They come through the Northeast and travel all around the country. They love going to churches and doing Sunday
Yeah.
mornings, doing events. We've had them for a couples conference. They've done music for a women's retreat, different things like that.
they've done
And
like
a ladies retreat too. I think.
Yeah.
Backyard
That's
concerts.
right.
That's right.
Yeah, backyard concerts, all the things.
They're awesome. So definitely check them out. And then, yeah, again, YouTube.
YouTube.
Subscribe.
Listen, y'all, he now is nervous about pushing it because we have this bet on the line.
I'm just unsubscribing on all of it. No,
No, I need you to subscribe. I need you to get your friends to subscribe. I don't even need you to watch the YouTube videos. I just need you to click
She's just
subscribe.
into the vanity metrics. That's all. Yes.
No, I'm just I really want to make this TikTok video happen with Andy. Also, in all seriousness, I need you to start sending me suggestions on what trendy video that is appropriate.
That's that I can still work in ministry and maybe run for political office. I mean, it can be embarrassing, but it cannot like ruin my career.
Somewhere we'll walk that line. So yeah, send those in. But also take the time, if this has been beneficial to you, we appreciate you sharing it with your friends. It's always encouraging to us when you comment or send messages if you have questions.
Good. We have the link in the show notes for questions that we would love to interact with. Ask us a funny question, ask us a serious question, ask us both. Do it in a crazy accent. I don't know.
Laura.
No, don't do that.
I find it funny. So
Yeah, well, that's fine.
we appreciate you taking the time to listen. I know honestly, there are a million things you could listen to while you're driving around, walking around, whatever you're doing right now. And we appreciate you hanging out with us.
Absolutely. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.